I never wanted my father's business. Let me make that perfectly clear from the start. Growing up in Boston with its red brick buildings and narrow streets, I watched Dad pour his life into that hardware store on Beacon Hill. 30 years he spent in that dusty place, knowing every customer by name, remembering their kids, their renovations, their divorces. Parker's Hardware was more than a store. It was Dad's kingdom, small as it was. My brother Kevin, though, he breathed that place. Even his kids. While I was reading books under trees at the Common, he'd be standing on a stepladder arranging socket wrenches or learning how to cut keys. "Tommy doesn't have the knack for it," Dad would say to customers, not bothering to lower his voice. "But Kevin here's got hardware in his blood. Mom died when we were teenagers. Breast cancer, quick and brutal. And afterward, the store became even more central to our fractured family. Dad and Kevin found comfort in its routines, while I retreated further into my studies. By the time I graduated from UMass with my accounting degree, the divide was clear. Kevin belonged at Parker's, and I belonged anywhere else. So I moved to Chicago, built my own life, made partner at my firm by 35, got married to Rachel, had 2 kids, bought the house in Evanston with the big backyard. I visited Boston twice a year, Christmas and Dad's birthday in July, and those visits grew more strained as time passed. We'd sit at the dinner table at Dad's place in Dorchester, the same house we grew up in, and struggle to find things to talk about beyond polite basics. "The store's doing great," Kevin would always say, though his tight smile suggested otherwise. "We're holding our own against the big boxes." Dad would nod, pride shining through. "Your brother's making smart moves. Just expanded the electrical section. Got a new PUS system." I'd listen, ask appropriate questions, try to care. Rachel would squeeze my knee under the table when my responses grew too short, or when I checked my watch too obviously. Then last April, Dad collapsed while carrying a shipment of bathroom fixtures. Heart attack. Massive. He was gone before the ambulance even arrived. Kevin called to tell me, his voice wooden and strange, like he was reading from a script. "The funeral's Friday," he said. "Can you come?" I was on a plane that night, leaving Rachel to explain to the kids why Dad wouldn't be sending them birthday cards anymore. I spent the flight staring at the seat back in front of me, numb with a grief that felt both overwhelming and incomplete. I hadn't really known my father for years, not the way Kevin had. The funeral was packed. Half of Dorchester seemed to show up. Customers, suppliers, neighbors. They all had stories about my dad that I'd never heard, little kindnesses he'd extended that I'd never witnessed. Kevin, in his ill-fitting black suit, received their condolences like a politician, shaking hands firmly, thanking people for coming. I stood beside him, an awkward shadow, accepting hugs from strangers who called me Tommy and said how much I looked like my dad. It was a week later, sitting in the cluttered office of Dad's attorney, that the bomb dropped. The lawyer, Morris Feldman, who'd handled Dad's affairs for decades, cleared his throat and adjusted his glasses. "As per your father's will, the business itself, Parker's Hardware, including all inventory, accounts, goodwill, and the building, is to be divided equally between his sons, Thomas and Kevin Parker." Kevin's head snapped up. "What?" the lawyer continued, unperturbed. "The family home goes to Kevin outright. There are some other minor bequests, but that's the substance of it." I sat there, stunned. Dad had left me half of the business I'd spent my entire adult life avoiding. It made no sense. Kevin's face had gone from shock to something darker. "There has to be a mistake," Kevin said, his voice tight. "Dad always said the store would be mine." Morris shook his head. "I drafted this will myself, just last year. Your father was very clear about his wishes." I found my voice. "I don't understand. I don't know anything about running a hardware store. I live in Chicago, for God's sake." "Perhaps that's something you brothers will need to discuss," Morris said, closing the folder. "Your father did mention that he hoped this arrangement would bring you closer." Kevin stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "Bring us closer? By forcing Tommy to take half of something he never wanted? By taking half away from me?" He laughed, a harsh sound. Classic Dad, still trying to fix us from beyond the grave. I followed Kevin out onto the street, calling after him. "Kev, wait. We need to talk about this." He spun around, his face flushed. Talk about what, Tommy? How you're suddenly half owner of a business you couldn't care less about? Or how I'm supposed to share my livelihood with someone who ran away the first chance he got? I didn't run away, I said, the old defensiveness rising. I just wanted something different. Yeah, well, now Dad's made sure you've got a stake in what I wanted. Kevin jammed his hands in his pockets. So what now? You going to sell your half to me? Because I can tell you right now, I don't have that kind of money. The question caught me off guard. Selling would be the obvious solution. Clean, simple. I could walk away again, back to my life in Chicago, with a check in my pocket and a clear conscience. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the memory of all those people at the funeral, or the realization that this store was the last piece of Dad I had left, or maybe it was the naked vulnerability in my brother's face, something I hadn't seen since we were kids. I don't know, I said honestly. I need some time to think. Kevin nodded stiffly. Well, while you're thinking, the store's still open. Customers still need to be served. Bills still need to be paid. I get that, I said. Look, I've got to head back to Chicago tomorrow to sort some things out at work. But I'll come back next weekend. We'll figure this out, Kev. Sure we will, he said, but his tone suggested otherwise. As he walked away toward his car, shoulders hunched against a spring breeze, I couldn't help feeling that Dad had left us not just a business, but a ticking time bomb. The flight back to Chicago felt longer than usual. I kept replaying that meeting with Kevin in my head, seeing the betrayal in his eyes. Rachel picked me up at O'Hare, her face a mixture of sympathy and curiosity. How bad was it? She asked as we merged onto the Kennedy Expressway. Dad left me half the store, I said, still not quite believing it myself. Rachel's eyebrows shot up. Seriously? What are you going to do? I have no idea. I watched the Chicago skyline emerge through the windshield. Kevin expects me to sell my half to him, but he can't afford to buy me out. And if you don't sell? I shrugged. I become an absentee co-owner of a hardware store 1,500 miles away, with a brother who resents every breath I take. Rachel was quiet for a moment, negotiating a lane change. You know, she said finally, you've got some vacation time saved up. Maybe you should go back next week, like you promised Kevin. Spend some time in the store. Get a feel for it. And then what? And then you'll know what to do. She made it sound so simple, but nothing about this situation felt simple. Back at work on Monday, I sat through budget meetings and client calls with only half my brain engaged. The other half kept circling back to Boston, to that cramped store with its familiar smell of sawdust and metal. By Wednesday, I'd made up my mind. I told my boss I needed 2 weeks of family leave. He was surprisingly understanding. Apparently losing a parent bought you some grace even in the cutthroat world of accounting. I booked a flight for Friday morning and called Kevin to let him know I was coming. I'll be there all day, he said curtly. Store closes at 7. When I walked into Parker's Hardware that Friday afternoon, the bell above the door jingling, it was like stepping back in time. The store looked exactly as it had during my childhood. The long wooden counter, the walls of tiny drawers containing screws and bolts, the handwritten signs advertising sales on caulk or light bulbs. Kevin was helping an elderly woman pick out a replacement doorknob, his patient explanation of the different models so like Dad's that my throat tightened. He nodded at me, finished with the customer, and then gestured to the back office. We're short-handed today, he said, as we walked past shelves of paint cans. Mike called in sick, and Saturdays are always busy. The office was more of a glorified closet, with a desk crammed against one wall and file cabinets lining the other. Dad's presence was everywhere, his Red Sox cap still hanging on a hook, his reading glasses on the desk, a half-empty pack of his favorite peppermints. Kevin moved some papers from the only chair and pointed to it. Sit. I complied, feeling like I was being called to the principal's office. Kevin leaned against the desk, arms crossed. Look, I've been thinking about this all week, he started, and I've come up with a proposal. I can't buy you out all at once, but I could do it in installments. 5 years, maybe. You'd still get your half of the profits in the meantime. It was a reasonable offer, exactly the kind of clean solution I should have jumped at. But something held me back. What if... I hesitated, surprised at the words forming. What if I didn't sell? Kevin's face darkened. What do you mean? I don't know exactly. But what if I stayed? Helped out for a while. Helped out? Kevin looked genuinely confused. You don't know the first thing about hardware, Tommy. I know about business, though. Accounting, taxes, systems. I gestured at the ancient computer on the desk. When was the last time you updated your inventory software? We manage fine, Kevin said defensively. That's not what I heard you telling Dad at Christmas. You said the big boxes were eating into your margins. Kevin's jaw tightened. So what? You think you're going to swoop in and save the day with some spreadsheets? No, I stopped. Took a breath. I'm just saying maybe Dad was right. Maybe we could work together on this. You know the hardware side, I know the business side. For how long? A week? A month? Until you get bored and head back to your real life? His words stung, because they contained a grain of truth. My life was in Chicago. My family was there. But something about being in this store, breathing in its familiar air, made me unwilling to walk away just yet. I've taken 2 weeks off, I said. Let's just see how it goes. Kevin looked like he wanted to argue more, but the bell over the door jingled again. Fine, he said, pushing off from the desk. You want to help? The delivery from Ace came in this morning. Needs to be unpacked and entered into the system. He pointed to a stack of boxes in the corner and left without another word. The next few days fell into a pattern. I'd arrive at the store early. Kevin had given me keys with obvious reluctance, and work my way through the backlog of paperwork and inventory. Kevin handled the customers, occasionally calling me out to the floor when they needed something carried to their car, or when the line at the register got too long. We barely spoke beyond what was necessary for the business. At night, I'd go back to Dad's house. Our house now, I supposed, though it was still filled with his things, and order takeout, too tired to cook. I'd call Rachel and the kids, trying to explain to my confused 7-year-old why Daddy was still in Boston. By the end of the first week, I'd discovered several problems with the store's operations. The inventory system was a mess. Items not entered, quantities wrong, orders placed too late or not at all. The pricing was inconsistent, sometimes wildly so. And the books, well, Dad had never been great with numbers, and Kevin had inherited that trait. I found Kevin in the plumbing aisle on Friday, helping a young couple pick out parts for a sink repair. When they left, I approached with my laptop. I need to show you something, I said. We went to the office and I pulled up the spreadsheets I'd been working on all week. You're bleeding money in certain departments, I explained, pointing to the screen. Especially electrical and plumbing. Your costs have gone up, but your prices haven't kept pace. Kevin frowned. We can't raise prices too much. The Home Depot over in Somerville already undercuts us. Yes, but look here. I scrolled down. You're actually beating them on some items. Power tools, certain brands of paint. We could shift the store's focus, promote these categories more. Kevin looked at the numbers, his frown deepening. Dad always said we needed to be a full-service hardware store. Customers expect to find everything they need. And they still could, I argued. But we adjust the margins. Maybe change the layout to highlight the stuff that actually makes money. Kevin ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so reminiscent of Dad that it made my chest ache. I don't know, Tommy. That's not how we've ever done things. Maybe that's why the store's struggling, I said, more sharply than I intended. Kevin's head snapped up, eyes flashing. We're not struggling. We're doing fine. No, you're not. I closed the laptop. Kevin, you're barely breaking even. Another year like this, and you'll be in the red. The truth hung between us, heavy and undeniable. Kevin stood up abruptly. I've got to get back to the floor, he said, and left me sitting alone in Dad's office, surrounded by the ghosts of his filing system. Saturday brought an unexpected Boston summer storm, rain pounding against the windows of the store like tiny fists. Despite the weather, we were busy. Apparently nothing spurred home repair, quite like water pouring through a neglected roof. I spent the morning at the register, ringing up purchases while Kevin darted around the store, answering questions about downspouts and waterproofing. It was almost noon when Jenny Miller came in, dripping water on the worn wooden floors. I recognized her immediately, though it had been at least 15 years. She'd been my lab partner in high school chemistry, her dark hair always smelling faintly of strawberries, her laugh infectious enough to get us both kicked out of class more than once. "Tommy Parker," she said, grinning as she approached the counter. "I heard you were back in town." I returned her smile, genuinely pleased to see a friendly face. "Jenny Miller. Still running around Dorchester, I see." "It's Jenny Rossi now," she corrected, holding up her left hand to display a simple gold band. "2 kids, a mortgage, the whole deal. What about you?" "Same, minus the Rossi. I married a girl from Chicago named Rachel." "I know," Jenny said, then laughed at my surprised expression. "Your dad used to show me pictures of your kids whenever I came in. He was so proud of you." The comment caught me off guard. Dad? Proud of me? He'd always seemed more disappointed than anything else, especially compared to how he talked about Kevin. "Anyway," Jenny said, "I didn't just come in to catch up. I need help with my bathroom sink. It's leaking everywhere, and Frank's working a double shift at the hospital." "Kevin's the plumbing expert," I said, looking around the store for my brother. "Let me grab him for you." I found Kevin in the back, unloading a new shipment of flashlights. "Jenny Rowe. Miller's here," I told him. "Needs help with a leaky sink." Kevin nodded and headed to the front, leaving me to finish with the flashlights. I could hear their conversation drifting back, Kevin asking detailed questions about the type of sink, the nature of the leak, whether she'd tried tightening the connections herself. When I returned to the register, Jenny was paying for a handful of parts, her expression relieved. "Kevin's a lifesaver," she told me. "Just like your dad was." I swear, half the houses in this neighborhood are still standing because of Parker advice. After she left, the store quieted down. The rain had intensified, discouraging all but the most desperate customers. Kevin and I moved around each other in silence, straightening shelves and restocking items. "Jenny seems to be doing well," I said eventually, just to break the silence. Kevin nodded. "Yeah, she comes in a lot. Her husband's a doctor at Mass General, but he works crazy hours. She ends up doing most of the home repairs herself. Dad helped her out?" "Dad helped everyone out," Kevin said, a note of pride in his voice. "He knew more about fixing things than anyone I've ever met." I thought about that as we continued working. Dad might not have been much for words, especially with me, but his actions had spoken volumes to the people around him, to the community. When closing time came, Kevin flipped the sign on the door and started counting out the register. I grabbed a broom and began sweeping the day's dirt toward the back door. "I've been thinking about what you said," Kevin said suddenly, not looking up from the cash drawer. "About the store's finances." I paused my sweeping. "Yeah? You're right," he admitted, the words seeming to cost him. "We're not doing great. Haven't been for a while." I leaned on the broom, waiting for him to continue. "Dad knew it too," Kevin said. "That's why he trailed off, shaking his head. "That's why he what?" Kevin finally looked up at me. "That's why he left you half the store. He told me he was going to, about 6 months ago. Said you had the head for business that he and I both lacked." Kevin's laugh was bitter. I was so mad at him. Felt like he was saying I couldn't handle things on my own. "That's not—" "No, he was right," Kevin interrupted. "I can't. I know hardware, Tommy. I know what people need to fix a leaky faucet or hang a door. But I don't know how to compete with Home Depot. I don't know how to keep this place afloat when everyone's shopping online." The admission hung in the air between us, weighty with all the unspoken tension of our lives. "The thing is," I said carefully, "I don't know hardware, but I do know business. And from what I've seen this week, Parker's has something the big boxes don't." Kevin raised an eyebrow. "Yeah? What's that?" "You," I said simply. "And Dad, through you. People come here because you know their names, their houses, their projects. You remember that Mrs. Henderson has arthritis and needs the easy open paint cans. You know that Bill Chen is renovating his entire second floor and will need a specific kind of insulation next month." Kevin looked away, but not before I caught the emotion in his eyes. "That's worth something," I continued. "Maybe not enough on its own, but it's a foundation we can build on." "We?" Kevin's voice was skeptical, but there was something else there too, a hesitant hope. "I've been doing some research," I said. "There's this concept called a hybrid retail model. Stores that combine brick and mortar with online elements. What if we created a website? A good one. Not just a digital business card, where locals could order stuff for same-day pickup. Or what if we offered installation services for the products we sell? Dad used to do that informally anyway. That would take money, Kevin pointed out. Money we don't have. I've got some savings, I said. And there are small business loans, tax incentives for local retailers. Kevin looked at me for a long moment, then shook his head with a small laugh. You've really been thinking about this, haven't you? I had, more than I'd realized. All week, as I'd worked through the store's problems, ideas had been forming. Ways to modernize without losing the core of what made Parker's special. I'd found myself excited by the challenge in a way I hadn't been excited about my corporate job in years. Do you actually want to do this? Kevin asked, watching my face carefully. Or is this just you being, I don't know, dutiful, fulfilling Dad's last wish or whatever? It was a fair question, one I'd been asking myself. I don't know, I answered honestly, but I do know I'm not ready to walk away yet. Kevin nodded slowly. I'm not sure I can work for my little brother. You wouldn't be working for me, I said quickly. We'd be partners, equal say. You'd handle the store operations, customer relations, all the stuff you're good at. I'd handle the financial side, marketing, the online expansion. And you'd do this from Chicago? The question I'd been avoiding. No, I admitted. I'd need to be here at least for a while, to get things set up. And Rachel? The kids? I don't know yet, I said, the reality of what I was proposing finally hitting me. I'd have to talk to them. Kevin was quiet for a moment, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a set of keys. He removed one and held it out to me. Dad's apartment above the store, he explained. It's nothing fancy, but it's empty. Might be a good place to stay while you figure things out. I took the key, feeling its weight in my palm. Thanks. Kevin nodded, then turned back to the register. Don't thank me yet. This whole idea might crash and burn. It might, I agreed, but at least we'll go down fighting. Kevin looked up, a ghost of a smile on his face. Together, I echoed. And for the first time since Dad died, it felt like a promise I could keep. That night, I walked up the narrow stairs to Dad's apartment, unlocked the door, and stepped inside. It was small but neat, with simple furniture and a kitchenette in one corner. Through the window, I could see the lights of Dorchester stretching out, the same view Dad had looked at for decades. I sat on the edge of the bed and called Rachel. When she answered, I could hear our kids in the background, laughing over some game. Hey, I said, I need to talk to you about something. As I explained my ideas, the possibility of staying in Boston longer, of trying to save the store with Kevin, I waited for her objections, for the practical questions about our mortgage, the kids' schools, my job. But instead, there was a thoughtful silence when I finished. You sound different, she said finally. More, I don't know, alive. I feel different, I admitted. Like maybe this is something I need to do. Then do it, Rachel said, her voice soft but certain. We'll figure out the rest. After we hung up, I walked around the small apartment, touching Dad's things, seeing the life he'd built for himself after Mom died. It was simple, but genuine, surrounded by the community he'd served for so long. Outside, the rain had stopped. The streets glistened under the streetlights, cleaned by the storm. Tomorrow, Kevin and I would start planning in earnest. We'd argue and compromise, learn to work together in ways we never had as kids. It wouldn't be easy. Nothing worthwhile ever was. But for the first time in years, I felt like I was exactly where I needed to be. The first month of our partnership passed in a blur of activity. Kevin and I settled into a routine, me arriving early to work on our new website and business plan, him coming in later after dropping supplies to contractors who needed materials at dawn. We'd overlap during the busy hours, then I'd stay late, poring over spreadsheets and marketing plans while Kevin headed home to his apartment in Dad's old house. The store began to transform. We cleared out the cluttered back room and converted it into a small office space with proper desks and updated computers. We reorganized the shelves, putting the most profitable items at eye level and creating clearer signage. Small changes, but they made the store feel more navigable, more intentional. I'd been living in Dad's apartment above the store, existing in a strange limbo between my old life and whatever this new one was becoming. Rachel and the kids had visited once, the weekend spent showing them around Boston, watching my children explore the store with the same curiosity I'd once had. When they left, the silence in the apartment grew heavier. "You miss them," Kevin observed one evening as we locked up the store. Not a question, just a statement of fact. "Yeah," I admitted. "Video calls aren't the same." He nodded, understanding in his eyes. Rachel seemed good with this arrangement, though. "For now," I said, "but for now can't last forever." The truth was, Rachel had been surprisingly supportive, but I could hear the strain creeping into her voice during our calls. Emma had started soccer, and I'd missed her first game. Jack had lost a tooth and put it under his pillow without me there, to make up a story about the tooth fairy. Life was continuing in Chicago, with or without me. "So, what's the timeline?" Kevin asked, leaning against the counter. "For all this?" He gestured around the store. I'd been avoiding this question, even with myself. 3 more months, I said, the words feeling like a commitment as they left my mouth. By then, the website should be fully operational, the new inventory system implemented, and we'll have the data to see if our changes are actually improving the bottom line. Kevin was quiet for a moment. "And then you go back to Chicago." "That was always the plan," I said, though saying it aloud made my stomach twist uncomfortably. "Right," Kevin said, his tone neutral. "The plan." The next morning, I woke early and sat at Dad's small kitchen table with my laptop, fingers hovering over the keyboard. I'd been putting off calling my boss in Chicago, extending my leave week by week with vague explanations about family business requiring my attention. But the reality was, I'd used up all my goodwill. It was time to make a decision: return to my job or resign. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. Rachel's face appeared on the screen. "Hey," I answered, guilt immediately coloring my voice. "I was just about to call you." "Were you?" Her tone was light, but I could hear the tension underneath. "Because I've been waiting for you to make a decision, Tommy. It's been a month and a half." "I know," I said, standing up to pace the small apartment. "I'm working on it. Kevin and I were just talking about the timeline yesterday. I think 3 more months and..." "3 months?" Rachel interrupted. "Tommy, school starts in 3 weeks. Emma's been asking when we're moving to Boston or when you're coming home. I need to know what to tell her." The question hit me like a brick. Moving to Boston? The thought had been hovering at the edges of my mind, unacknowledged, but Rachel had gone straight to it, laying it out as a real possibility. "I don't know," I said honestly. "The store's starting to turn around, but it's still fragile. Kevin can't handle all these changes alone." Rachel was quiet for a moment. "So that's it? You're choosing the store over us?" "No," I protested. "I'm not choosing anything. I'm just trying to figure out how to make it all work." "Well, while you're figuring it out, your children are growing up without you," Rachel said, her voice catching. "I support you, Tommy. I really do. But I can't put our lives on hold indefinitely." After we hung up, I sat on the edge of Dad's bed, my head in my hands. The weight of competing obligations pressed down on me from all sides. I thought about my job in Chicago. Secure, well-paying, utterly predictable. I thought about Parker's Hardware. Challenging, uncertain, surprisingly fulfilling. Kevin found me still sitting there an hour later when he came to see why I hadn't opened the store yet. "You okay?" he asked, taking in my rumpled appearance. I looked up at him. My brother who'd stayed while I'd left, who'd shouldered burdens I'd never even acknowledged. "No," I said honestly. "I'm not okay." Over coffee in the apartment, I told him about Rachel's call, about the decision looming over me. "So go back," Kevin said simply when I finished. "We always knew this was temporary." I stared at him. "But the store is doing better," he finished for me. "You've set up systems I can maintain. The website's almost done. I've learned a lot these past weeks." "But we had plans," I argued. "The expansion into installation services, the community workshops." "Will happen," Kevin said firmly. "Maybe not as fast, maybe not exactly as we envisioned, but they'll happen." I looked at him, this brother I'd spent most of my adult life avoiding. In the past 6 weeks, we'd argued about inventory and pricing, stayed up late strategizing over beers, shared memories of Dad that made us laugh until we cried. We'd become partners in a way I never thought possible. And now I was preparing to leave again. What if I didn't go back? The words emerged before I fully formed the thought. Kevin raised an eyebrow. Didn't go back to Chicago, you mean? Or to my old job? I clarified, the idea taking shape as I spoke. What if I resigned, found something here in Boston? Consulting work I could do remotely while still helping with the store. And Rachel? The kids would move here, I said, the possibility suddenly clear. We'd find a place near the store. The kids would start at new schools. Kevin's expression was skeptical. That's a lot to ask of your family, Tommy. I know, I acknowledged. And maybe Rachel will say no, but I have to at least propose it as an option. Kevin nodded slowly. And if she says yes? If you all move here? What does that mean for the store, for us? It was the question beneath the question, the one that really mattered. What was I committing to? A few years of involvement before getting bored and moving on? Or something more permanent? It means I'm in, I said firmly. Long term. Equal partners like we talked about. You handling the store operations, me handling the business side. Kevin studied my face, looking for hesitation or doubt. You need to be sure, he said finally. Because if you commit and then bail, the store won't survive, and neither will we. I knew he wasn't just talking about the business. The fragile bridge we'd built between us these past weeks was still new, still vulnerable to collapse. I'm sure, I said, and was surprised to find it was true. Rachel's response wasn't what I expected. I've been waiting for you to figure it out, she said, when I called to propose the move to Boston. Her voice carried a curious mix of relief and resignation. I knew from the day you left that this wasn't just about settling your dad's estate. You did? I was genuinely surprised. How? Tommy, I've been married to you for 12 years. I've never seen you this invested in anything except maybe the kids. You call every night, and instead of talking about when you're coming home, you talk about inventory systems and marketing plans and the conversation you had with Mrs. Flaherty about her garden hose. I felt a flush of embarrassment. Had I been that transparent? So you're okay with moving? I asked cautiously. Rachel sighed. I didn't say that. I said I saw it coming. There's a difference. She had concerns, valid ones. Her job as a pediatric nurse could transfer to any hospital, but she'd built a reputation in Chicago. The kids would be leaving their friends in school mid-year. And then there was the financial uncertainty. Trading my stable accounting partnership for a stake in a struggling hardware store wasn't exactly a shrewd financial move. We'd be starting over, she said. And not just logistically. Our whole life would change. I know, I admitted. But maybe that's not a bad thing? When was the last time either of us felt really challenged, really alive in what we were doing? The question hung between us, weighted with the comfortable predictability we'd built over the years. Our life in Chicago was good. Solid schools, reliable jobs, the right neighborhood. But somehow, in the security of it all, something vital had gotten lost. 2 weeks, Rachel said finally. 2 weeks? I'm bringing the kids out in 2 weeks. We'll stay for the long weekend. Let's all spend some time in Boston, look at neighborhoods, schools. Then we decide. Together. It was more than fair. Better than I deserved, really. I love you, I said, meaning it more than I had in a long time. You'd better, she replied, but I could hear the smile in her voice. Those 2 weeks flew by. Kevin and I threw ourselves into making the store as presentable as possible, knowing that Rachel's opinion of the business would heavily influence her willingness to uproot our family for it. We finished the website, launched a small local advertising campaign, and even hosted our first DIY workshop, a Saturday morning session on basic plumbing repairs that drew a surprising crowd of 20 neighborhood residents. When Rachel and the kids arrived, I was waiting at Logan Airport, a nervous energy making it impossible to stand still. Emma spotted me first, her 8-year-old legs propelling her through the crowd with Jack toddling behind. I caught them both in a hug that made my chest ache. Rachel approached more slowly, a tentative smile on her face. Welcome to Boston, I said, kissing her cheek. The weekend unfolded better than I could have hoped. The kids loved the store, especially the old-fashioned mechanical cash register Kevin kept as a backup. Emma appointed herself junior sales clerk, solemnly helping customers find the right size of sandpaper. Jack was content to arrange and rearrange the display of colorful rubber washers, creating patterns only he understood. Rachel observed it all with cautious interest. She asked detailed questions about the business plan, the financials, our strategy for competing with the big box stores. Her practical nurse's mind cut through my enthusiasm to the core issues: sustainability, work-life balance, long-term growth potential. "It's not just about saving your dad's store, is it?" she asked one night after we'd put the kids to bed in my small apartment. We were sitting on the fire escape, sharing a bottle of wine, the sounds of the city a backdrop to our conversation. "What do you mean?" "I mean, you could have just helped Kevin set up better systems, given him some startup capital and gone back to Chicago. This is about something else for you." I looked out at the Dorchester skyline, considering her words. I said slowly, "it's about finding something that matters. Something with roots." Rachel nodded, understanding dawning in her eyes. "Your corporate clients in Chicago, you never cared about their spreadsheets. But here, every number represents a person you know, a family in the neighborhood." Exactly. I was relieved she got it. When Mrs. Henderson comes in for those easy open paint cans, I'm not just making a sale. I'm helping her stay independent in her home. When Bill Chen buys insulation, I'm helping keep his family warm next winter. "It's personal," Rachel said. "It's community," I corrected gently. "Something I didn't even realize I was missing until I came back here." She was quiet for a moment, swirling the wine in her glass. "The Gillespie School is impressive," she said, changing the subject. Emma liked the art room. We'd spent that morning touring schools in neighborhoods we might afford. The Gillespie was our top choice, a small public school with a good reputation and a diverse student body. "The apartment above Denali Coffee is available too," I added. 2 bedrooms, walking distance to the store and the school. "It's small," Rachel pointed out. "Smaller than our house. But the neighborhood's great. The park's right there for the kids. And there's that community garden you liked." Rachel smiled slightly. "You've really thought this through." "I have," I admitted. "But none of it matters if you're not on board. This has to be a family decision." She reached over and took my hand, her fingers warm against mine. "Let's sleep on it." The next day, our last before they had to fly back to Chicago, we took the kids to the public garden to ride the swan boats. It was a perfect fall day, the trees just beginning to turn, the air crisp but not cold. Emma and Jack squealed with delight as our boat glided across the pond, pointing at the ducks that swam alongside us. Rachel and I sat behind them, watching their excitement. "They seem happy here," she observed. "They're kids," I said. "They'd be happy anywhere we are." She nodded, acknowledging the truth of it. "And you're happy here." It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. "Happier than I've been in a long time." Rachel was quiet for a moment, her eyes on our children. Then she turned to me, decision written in her face. Okay, let's do it. Let's move to Boston." Relief and joy washed through me. I pulled her close, not caring that we were on a public swan boat with a dozen tourists watching. "Thank you." She laughed against my shoulder. "Don't thank me yet. Moving's a nightmare and I'm going to need a lot of help. Anything," I promised. "Whatever it takes." Over the kids' heads, across the gleaming water of the lagoon, my eyes met Kevin's. He was standing on the bridge that crossed the pond, watching our family with a complicated expression. I'd invited him to join us, but he'd declined, saying we needed time alone to decide. I gave him a thumbs up, a grin breaking across my face. He returned it with a slow nod and a small smile of his own. It wasn't just my life that would change with this decision. It was his too, in ways neither of us could fully anticipate. As our boat completed its circuit and drifted back to the dock, I felt a sense of rightness settle over me. The path ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be setbacks with the store, adjustments for the family, moments when we'd all question the decision. But we were making it together, eyes open, hearts committed. That night, after Rachel and the kids flew back to Chicago to begin the process of packing up our old life, I called Kevin. "It's official," I told him. "We're moving to Boston. Rachel's on board. That's great, he said, his voice warm but carrying an undertone I couldn't quite place. I'm happy for you, Tommy. Really. For us, I corrected. This is good for all of us. There was a pause. Then Kevin laughed. Yeah, well, we'll see. Partners in business is one thing. Having you around full-time as a brother again, that might take some getting used to. I laughed too, but his words lingered after we hung up. There was truth in them, beyond the joking. We were stepping into uncharted territory, not just as business partners, but as brothers finding our way back to each other after years of distance. Winter in Boston has a way of separating the tourists from the natives. By mid-January, the charm of snow-dusted brownstones gives way to the reality of slush-filled streets and bone-deep cold that seeps through any number of layers. It had been 2 months since Rachel and the kids had moved to Boston, setting up our new life in the apartment above Denali Coffee. 2 months of adjustment, of finding new routines, of learning to be a family in a different context. The store had survived the transition remarkably well. Our holiday sales exceeded projections, boosted by the new website and a growing reputation for quality service. The DIY workshops had become a regular weekend feature, drawing steady crowds of homeowners eager to learn basic repair skills. Kevin had even hired 2 part-time employees, college students from UMass Boston who worked alternating schedules. But beneath the surface success, tensions were brewing. They emerged in small ways at first, Kevin countermanding my instructions to the new employees, me changing orders he'd placed without discussion, both of us leaving passive-aggressive notes in the store's communication log. Minor irritations that grew as the winter deepened. You need to stop undermining me with the staff, Kevin said one evening after closing. We were alone in the store, the windows frosted with condensation, the heat pumping ineffectively against the January chill. I'm not undermining you, I protested. I'm trying to establish consistent procedures. By telling Aiden that everything I taught him about the inventory system was wrong, I winced. That's exactly what happened, Kevin interrupted. You came in after I'd spent an hour training him and completely changed the protocol. He wasn't wrong. I had revised his instructions, frustrated by what I saw as inefficiencies in his approach. But I hadn't considered how it would look to a new employee, or how it would feel to Kevin. I'm sorry, I said, the apology unfamiliar on my tongue. I should have talked to you first. Kevin seemed taken aback by my concession. He'd clearly been gearing up for a fight. Yeah, well, you should have. It's just... I hesitated, trying to articulate the frustration that had been building in me. Sometimes I feel like we're pulling in different directions. Kevin leaned against the counter, arms crossed. How so? You focus on the individual customer experience, which is important, but sometimes at the expense of efficiency. I focus on systems and processes, sometimes at the expense of the personal touch. We're both right, but we're not aligned. Kevin considered this. Dad used to say that a hardware store runs on relationships, not transactions. People come back because they trust you, not because you have the cheapest hammer. I know, I acknowledged, but they also come back because you have what they need, when they need it, because your prices are fair and your service is reliable. That takes systems. We were having the same argument we'd been having for months, just in different words. The fundamental tension between Kevin's traditional approach to the business and my more modernized vision. So what do we do? Kevin asked. Because this isn't working. The bluntness of his statement hit me hard. What do you mean, this isn't working? Sales are up 30% compared to last year. I'm not talking about the numbers, Kevin said, frustration edging his voice. I'm talking about us, this partnership. We're at each other's throats half the time. He was exaggerating, but not by much. We'd had more arguments in the past month than in all the previous ones combined. Look, I said, trying to diffuse the tension. It's been a stressful time. The move, the holidays, the new employees. We're still figuring things out. Kevin shook his head. It's more than that, Tommy. It's about control. We both want it, and neither of us is willing to give it up. The truth of his words settled uncomfortably between us. We'd structured our partnership as equals, but in practice we were constantly vying for the final say. So, what's the solution? I asked. We can't keep going like this. Kevin was quiet for a moment, his expression unreadable. Maybe we need to reconsider the arrangement. Maybe one of us needs to be in charge. My stomach dropped. Are you saying you want to buy me out after all? No, Kevin said quickly. That's not what I meant. I meant maybe we need clearer roles, defined territories, lines that don't get crossed. It made sense in theory, but in practice, the boundaries between our responsibilities were inherently blurry. The store was too small, our operations too intertwined for complete separation. Or maybe, a voice said from the doorway, you both need to remember why you're doing this in the first place. We turned to find Rachel standing there, snow dusting her dark hair, holding a paper bag that emanated the smell of the Chinese takeout from the place down the street. How long have you been there? I asked, embarrassed that she'd overheard our argument. Long enough, she said, crossing to the counter and setting down the bag. I brought dinner, but it sounds like you two are having a different kind of feast. Kevin had the grace to look abashed. We're just having a discussion. Uh-huh, Rachel said skeptically. A discussion that has both of you looking like you're about to throw punches. She began unpacking containers of food, the smell of garlic and ginger filling the store. Sit, eat, then talk like adults. We complied, somewhat sheepishly taking the containers she handed us. For a few minutes, we ate in silence, the tension gradually easing with each bite. You know what I think? Rachel said finally, pointing her chopsticks at us. I think you're both so focused on being right that you've forgotten you're on the same side. Kevin and I exchanged glances. Emma had a meltdown today, Rachel continued. Her teacher asked everyone to share what their parents do for work. And do you know what she said? We both shook our heads. She said her dad and her uncle work together to help people fix their homes. She said they're not just a store. They're part of the community. She was so proud, telling her class about the time you two stayed late to help the Rodriguez family after their basement flooded, about how you know everyone's names and what projects they're working on. I felt a warmth spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the spicy food. She said that? Rachel nodded. That's how she sees Parker's Hardware. Not as your competing visions, but as a place where people get help when they need it. She set down her container. Maybe that's what you both need to remember. Kevin was quiet for a moment, then let out a short laugh. Out of the mouths of babes, huh? 8-year-olds can be surprisingly insightful, I agreed. We finished eating in a more comfortable silence, the edge of our earlier argument dulled by Rachel's words and the shared meal. After she left to check on the kids, Kevin and I remained at the counter, the empty containers between us. She's right, you know, Kevin said finally. We've been so caught up in our own approaches that we've lost sight of the bigger picture. I nodded. So how do we fix it? Kevin considered for a moment. Remember when we were kids and Dad would take us fishing? I smiled at the memory. At that little pond in Franklin Park, he'd always say the same thing when we'd start arguing over who had the better spot or the better bait. You're scaring the fish, I quoted, hearing Dad's voice in my head. If you want to catch anything, you need to work together, not against each other. Kevin nodded. We're scaring the fish, Tommy. The simple truth of it hit home. Our bickering was affecting the store, the employees, our relationship. And for what? To prove who was right? To establish dominance? So, what do we do? I asked again. But this time the question wasn't confrontational. It was genuine. We compromise, Kevin said. I accept that we need better systems, more efficiency. You accept that relationships matter, that sometimes taking an extra 10 minutes with Mrs. Henderson isn't wasted time, it's an investment. And when we disagree, Kevin thought about it, we take it to a neutral third party. Not Rachel. She's not neutral where you're concerned. Jenny, I suggested. Jenny Rossi. She knows the community, understands what the store means to people, and she's not afraid to tell either of us when we're being idiots. Kevin laughed. God, that's true. Remember when she called out Dad for trying to charge her double for that special order sink faucet? Said she wasn't born yesterday and knew exactly what the markup should be? Dad respected her for it too, I added. Always gave her the fair price after that. We sat with the memory for a moment, both of us thinking about Dad, about the legacy he'd left us. Not just a store, but a way of connecting with the community around us. So we try again, Kevin said finally. Partner for real this time. I extended my hand across the counter. Partner. As we shook on it, I felt something shift between us. Not a resolution to all our differences. Those would continue, probably for as long as we ran the store together, but an acknowledgement that those differences were part of our strength, not just obstacles to overcome. Outside, snow had begun to fall again, blanketing the city in a fresh layer of white. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new customers, new opportunities to get it right or mess it up again. But tonight, in the warm light of the store our father had built, my brother and I had found common ground.